cloud? Okay. This is not looking good. All right. Okay, before I switch networks here, the other thing I wanted to survey from you guys is when your final reviews are next week, just so I'll get a sense for when you'll be done with studio and prepared to work on
I think the first year person, I guess only one first year, will be on Monday or Tuesday, and then the rest of us should be on Thursday or Friday.
We lose.
Did you lose me? Okay. You know what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to disconnect my hotspot here and see if I think my connection is up and running again. Hang on. Okay, you guys can still hear me. All right, that wasn't the end of it. Okay, so I think it's back up, which is good. However, my Epic Games launcher isn't working. So let's try that again. Are any of you planning on adding characters to your projects? Like people walking around doing stuff?
Yeah, even like pulls it down on the.
Okay. Let me just do one more thing here, just to make sure we don't lose connection. All right, cool. Okay, so if you want, you can download some Mixamo characters, but I did download this skeletal mesh into the Dropbox folder, and there are some associated animations that you can download from the assets folder, which is within the sample assets folder here. I would just go ahead and download that whole folder, but all of these FBX files are of that character, which we'll use as part of our sample scene. If I can open my sample scene. Okay, here we go. And again, I think I'm going to turn off video just in case. Oh, why did this become a 4.27 project? That's not right. Oh, well, it shouldn't affect what we're doing. I don't know, my project seemed to have met on its own updated to 4.27. I might have a hard time playing in VR, but I think for our purposes, it'll be fine. Okay, so we left off with talking about gathering assets from Quixel Bridge and bringing them in, applying landscape foliage and working with landscapes and landscape materials. I kind of updated the textures for some of these assets to kind of fit the theme a little bit, and we can talk about that briefly, but that will be among the recorded assets. Basically, the way in which you would do that is just to download the textures, and you can Photoshop those texture files. So if we look at this character, for instance, we can go and find the soldier character, and you'll see that the soldier comes with materials, and they'll come with these texture files, right? The texture file you'd be interested in should be fairly obvious. So if we double click on this, we can kind of see how the textures are kind of set up to align to various parts of the geometry of that particular asset. And so what we can do is right click on this, go to Asset Actions, and I can export this as a TGA file. And what I can do is take this into, I'll just put this on my desktop. You should obviously find a spot for it. And I can just take it into Photoshop and start manipulating it. So let me find that. Soldier body diffuse. I'm just going to drag it into Photoshop. And, so for instance, I could put Yale here instead of SWAT, right? So if I go into my PureF board, let's see if I have some reference images of Yale insignias and such. So yeah, maybe I want to use this, right? So I can just, I can just copy this and paste this in here. What I might do is select by color range, click OK. And let's just select all of this other stuff we don't need. And then Control-Shift-I to select the inverse, and I can delete that. I'm going to hit Control-L and just make this all white. How do I do that? Oh, no, I need to Control-L, make this all white. Control-T, shrink it down, start bringing it over. And then with this, I got it on the right layer, right? This is all just Photoshop stuff that you guys, this is the, sorry. This is all just Photoshop stuff that hopefully you guys already know how to do. I'm just going to use my stamp tool. Key. Just, I'm doing a bad job here. I need to find a better spot to. Just do it properly instead of rushing through it. Just so I can go through the process once. Tool, Alt. Probably a faster way to do this, but I'm not as good as you guys probably are in Photoshop. right? So then you sort of prepare your object. I'm just going to rotate this by eye. And then drag it over, shrink it down. Fade it out a bit. Why did that happen? Enter, fade it out a bit. Right. And then I can just collapse this layer and I can save it. And I can just drag that file right back into Unreal, and it'll just replace that texture. If I can find it. Here we go, soldier body diffuse. And so now if we look, you know, our SWAT guys have like a Yale insignia, right? So just ways of customizing some of the assets you might be finding on Sketchfab. Like if you want to get rid of like these bullet holes and things like that, like you can totally do that. It's really more of a Photoshop process, right? And so I went ahead and customized the textures here just to sort of put Yale logos on it and to change the color. Same thing for this asset. I might go and change these other assets that I also found in the asset store, or just leave them alone, right? Prioritize what you think is important, right? And so now we had talked about, you know, adding animations to this character, and that character then becomes potentially playable like this, right? So I can play this character around. But when I hit play, I can also, you know, sort of add these animations. So like this vehicle, like driving up and this person walking forward. And let's talk about how I did that, right? And so when it comes to animating in Unreal, what we're gonna wanna do is add what's called a level sequence. And so if we go into cinematic, there is a level sequence actor. And so if you're working on your own project, go ahead and drag a level sequence actor into your scene, right? This project, if you're using the example project, it already has a level sequence added, which is controlling all of the, like this vehicle driving up and this character walking up. And we can go ahead and highlight this level sequencer. And I'm going to click this button to open that. And it should give you another tab here. And this is where we kind of choreograph using keyframes all of the animations and action that's happening in the scene, right? What you're going to want to do with the level sequence actor, though, is if you want this to play when the person hits play on the game, or starts the game at the start of the game, you're going to want to check this box, which is by default turned off. Okay, so you're going to want to check autoplay. And in my case, I'm just going to hit pause at the end. Otherwise, everything's going to sort of reset back to the beginning position, right? And so pause at the end just kind of leaves everything where you sort of left off in your final frame out of sequencer, right? So again, make sure you check this autoplay, which will play as soon as I click on the play button, and this pause at the end, so it just kind of retains the final frame's state when the character then kind of moves around in the VR scene, right? So in addition to the level sequence actor that's in our scene, so my level sequence actor is here. It's just, this is the placeholder for it. We also need to create the actual sequence that we are using to generate all of this animation, right? And that's referred to here. And so I created something called the master sequence, and I saved that in a folder called sequencer. And I have this thing called a master sequence, right? If you want to create a new sequence, just right click on here, go to animation, and you can type or look for new level sequence, right? And I can call this like Fox, something like that, because I'm going to add a little fox moving in my scene as part of this example, right? And so our sequencer here is referring to our master sequence, right? But I can always add other sequences within my master sequence. So sequences can be nested within other sequences. So you could have kind of different, it's like a different way of grouping animations. This is particularly helpful for creating videos, because then you would have a sequencer per camera, and then you might have a sequence for all of the action, right? So you can control the individual camera, so you can cut between different cameras. So you can nest sequences within sequences. So let's go ahead and add, let's see, if I do this. You can add a camera cut track. Sorry, that's not this. I can add a shot track and then add my additional sequence. So I can add the sequence that I had just created. And so whatever is happening in this sequence will kind of be layered and nested within all of the action that's happening here. Okay. So let's remove this for a second, just because I know that can get a little bit confusing. So let's just kind of like work within the master sequence, because I think for the purposes of your VR projects, all of the action can occur within the master sequence. So let's just kind of keep it there. And then towards the end of the tutorial, I'll show you how to add a camera, and we can play a camera using a different shot track. All that to say is you can nest sequences within sequences, right? So if I want to now add more action in this scene, let's go ahead and grab some assets to put into our scene, right? So I mentioned like maybe having like a fox running across. Actually, why don't we just add another soldier character, since you guys have the soldier characters. So let's open the soldier, grab the skeletal mesh, and I'm just going to drag a skeletal mesh of the soldier in its T-pose. There are currently no animations associated with it, but we can add those in sequencer later, right? And then the other thing I'm going to use is a camera rig rail actor, right? And so this asset is intended to control the movement of a camera, but what's nice about it is we can also control the movement of pretty much anything using it, right? And so what we have here, let me focus in on this, is kind of this abstraction of a sort of a rail system, right? This is the sort of attachment point of whatever you want to put to it. And then we can see the two rails here. And inside or in between the rails, you can see this line and a control point, right? So I can click on that control point, right? And you can see my widget pops on there, and I could stretch my rail out, right? So I can sort of designate a starting and ending point. So I'm just going to go ahead and stretch that rail out. And what you'll start to see is there's like this other control point. And what this is if you guys are familiar with Bezier curves, this is a Bezier control point. So the reason why that's helpful is we can always add spline points and kind of move our rail in whatever position we want. And then we could use the Bezier control points to kind of adjust the severity of the curves or the movement. So you could have something very smooth or something very sharp, depending on how you position your control points, right? The important thing to note about the camera rig rail is regardless of where you set your points, it goes from 0 in the beginning to 1 at the end. And so what we can do is add a very complex series of turns and moves, but we can very smoothly control the position of an actor moving along that curve just by setting a keyframe for the 0 position and the 1 position. And that'll start to make a certain amount of sense when we talk about adding animations to this character, right? So I could do something quite simply without using the rig rail in Sequencer. I can highlight my skeletal mesh. I can go add actor to sequence, and you'll see whatever is highlighted is posted on top. So I can add this character, right? And what comes with the character, in this case, it's skeletal mesh. And so any animations that are associated with the skeletal mesh will be keyable in our sequencer, along with the character's transform. The character's transform is defined by 3 elements: the location, rotation, and scale. So all of these things we can start to change and animate in sequencer, right? And so right now I just have 150 frames, which is fine for our purposes. And so what I can do is I can set a key here for my location, advance my play, and you can see how everything else advances that's also in my sequence. And I can move this character forward and say I want the character to walk up to this point as well. And then I could just set another, let's set a location key, right? And so now, oh wait, what happened to my character? Sorry, let me delete this key, move my character, and then I can click on this little plus button to add a key. And you can see it creates like a little spline here. And this just kind of shows that from the 0 frame to the 150th frame, and this is working at 30 frames per second, this character is going to move kind of, flying Jesus style from start to end, right? And so if I hit play now, we can see that the action starts because I set it, and that character is moving from the starting point to the ending point, right? But obviously we don't want the character to move in that way. We want the character to walk, right? And so with all skeletal meshes, as long as you're importing, and let's go into Mixamo here, right? As long as you're adding the animations and downloading them, right? All of those animations that you would bring in. So I have some idle animations and some walking animations. Those should be associated. So I've just double clicked on my skeletal mesh, right? Those should all be associated with this actor. And so we have a series of these animations, which are now going to be accessible to us in Sequencer, right? So if I want to add a walk animation, right? And this is a looping animation, so I can always just drag this all the way over, and you can start to see these points represent where the looping starts and stops. And so I can just play it, and as long as I have the animation active in Sequencer, it's going to play that walking animation. Obviously, we'll have to change the timing of the walking here, but we'll do that. We'll do that in a second, right? So now if I hit play, he's like sort of forward moonwalking, but the animation is at least playing, and then we set the animation to pause at the end. So wherever that animation was when this character stopped moving is where it's going to pause, right? And so what we can also do here is at the end of the sequence, right? So maybe I'll just kind of stop this and add a different animation. I might add, say, my idle animation here, except I don't want this to be that long. It'll stop at 150 anyway. So now if we hit play, the character will walk, and then we'll switch over to the idle animation, right? And it kind of does like a little jump when it switches over, so we can visualize that. So he's walking, and then all of a sudden he kind of jumps into his idle animation pose, right? With this character, which is this person, all I did here was I overlapped the walk and the idle so that the transition becomes a little bit smoother. It still kind of jumps, but it helps with the like weird freeze frame effect where he just kind of jumps into position all of a sudden. You know, that's kind of like a added detail. So if you don't get to that point, it's totally fine. But you know, having the character switch from walk to idle might just be helpful when the VR character is walking around this character for an animation to be playing, right? So that's the kind of easiest way of adding motion, right? This can be done with anything, right? So if I drag the cube in here, I can add that cube to my sequence, right? In this case, there are no animations associated with it, but I could, animate its position, rotation, or scale, right? So if I wanted to do rotation, and at the end, I wanted to just kind of spin around and then set a key, right? Oh, shoot, I did the wrong one. Let's just do it here. I set the key in the wrong. So if I set another rotation key, except I need to actually rotate it. So when I go back and forth, I can have an object rotate, I can have the object move or change scale, right? So anything in your scene, you can effectively keyframe the transform at a minimum. But if you have a skeletal mesh, you can add animations in order to have the character walk and such. But what we're going to want to do is, if I don't want my character to just walk in a straight line, delete my SWAT character. If I don't want to have my character walk in a straight line, it's kind of annoying to add transform keys to various points. So I can kind of take my SWAT actor, move them over here, and then add a key. And what that's going to do is, did that do anything? I feel like that didn't do anything. Sorry. Oh, I meant the wrong character. This character. So if I wanted to add another key here for its location, right? So I can have this character walk, but then you see I have to then change his rotation, and the walking speed is going to start to vary depending on how many sort of points I'm placing. And so this is where a camera rig rail starts to really be helpful, right? And so let's delete the SWAT3 character from my sequencer. And let's just work on setting up the rig rail first, and then we'll add all of them back into our sequencer, right? So what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to find my SWAT character, and I want to make it a child of my rig rail, right? So it's my rig rail 3 and my SWAT 3 characters. So I'm just going to drag my SWAT 3 character over the rig rail. And so now it's a child of that. So now if I go into my rig rail and start, you can see that the SWAT character is now moving relatively to my rig rail when I go from 0 to 1, right? I need to go into my SWAT character and set its location to 0, 0, 0. And that will sort of position our character right at the sort of connection plate of our rig rail. So now if we look at the rig rail, you can see he's moving along, right? And then the other thing we could do is click this box, which will lock the orientation of our character so that the character is then rotating with the direction of the rig rail, right? And so this, using a rig rail will kind of save us a lot, especially if you have characters or things that are moving, or even a camera, if you want the camera to kind of turn in the same direction that the rig rail is turning, you can check this box and make it do that, right? And so now what we can do is, just without worrying about the transform of the character itself, we can just grab these points on the rig rail. If I can, I will select the landscape. So I can grab these points here and I can just, move them from the starting point to the ending point of my desired path of travel, right? And so I might just add a couple of points just so that, he's not walking straight, because no one walks in a perfectly straight line. I can add another spline point, right? So you can kind of play around with what that action is. And no matter what's going to happen, 0 is the start and 1 is the end. And so we can control that accordingly. And so now what we want to do is add our rig rail, and our character back into our sequencer, right? Except we don't need to worry about the transform of the SWAT character or the soldier character. All we need to do is add the track for the current position on rail. So with our rig rail selected, I'm going to add a track. And these are all of the components that we can control on the camera rig rail. So we can actually animate the spline points and things like that. But 9 times out of 10, all we'll really animate for a rig rail is the current position on rail. And so I'm going to add that. And so I can say at the beginning, I can set a key for my position to be 0. And at the end, I can set a key, or I can just do 1 here, and it'll create a key for me, right? And so we'll see that from 0 to 1, my character is now following this path, right? But we still have the weird T-pose thing, but the same rules apply. We just need to add the walk animation to the character. And so the character is just going to play that walk animation from the start of my sequence to the end of my sequence. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay. I mean, the key things to take away here are, adding movement to a character or anything is just a matter of kind of establishing a path. understanding the timing of when that character starts and stops, and then just kind of syncing that with whatever animations you might have, right? And so if I look, the walking animation is really way slower than his actual movement, right? And so you could see with this character, when I set my first keyframe, let me see, which one is that? Second one here, right? My position is at 0.8. And so if I did something similar with this, right? So with my keyframe, so with my playhead over my keyframe on frame 0, I can change the value of that keyframe to be, say, 0.8. And he's going to start essentially 80% of the way up from along the rig rail, right? That's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is to move, shorten my rig rail to be that length, right? But since I already laid out a bunch of spline points here, I think the shortcut would be to just set this to be 0.8. So now if I hit play, this foot movement kind of syncs up with the actual speed at which he's moving along the rig rail, right? And so, there are a couple of ways of adjusting the speed. One is to change the actual start position key. The other is to lengthen and shorten the rig rail itself. And then, if we have other animations, we can start to have these two characters not be so identical as they move. So for instance, if I want to desync their movement, I can kind of change the starting and stopping points of their loops so that when they walk, at the very least, their feet aren't in sync with one another. When I did that, I think I moved my keyframe. So I'm just going to undo that. Okay. If you wanted a different animation, so like for instance, this guy isn't actually holding anything, I think what I'll do is import some other walking animations. And so I could go into Mixamo and find whatever animations I want. But I also saved some additional animations in your in the assets folder. So where did I save those? I think those are under no. Let me just download. Right. So I have a different walking animation, which is this one. So let's download this. And then I have a different idle animation, which is this one. And so I can just download these, go into Unreal, look for them in my download folder. So I can grab these FBX files, drag them into here. And all I want to do is make sure that this is associated with my SWAT skeleton. It's going to kind of automatically find it for you. But I can import both of those now. And hopefully if I go into sequencer, I can just delete this walk animation and add this other walk animation. Drag it to my 0 key or 0 frame and then loop it around. And so now this guy is walking with a different animation, right? So you can just grab whatever Mixamo animations that you would want for your characters, and you could sort of mix them up depending on what you want the character to do. So now if we hit play, this walking animation is a little bit different in terms of its speed. So I might want to go into this key and make this like 0.7 or something like that. So now if I hit play, looks like that matches a little bit better, right? But you can just, again, apply any animation to these characters and start to include various assets in sequencer, right? And so with the rig rail, you know, I've attached this to kind of walk or to ride up this slope. So I just grabbed the control points and adjusted it. Same with this soldier character. So you can use the rig rail, use the control points to align it to whatever landscape surface or architectural surface that you're walking on. So if this character is walking up a series of steps, you would maybe you know, orient or add key points, or sorry, control points at the base of the stair to the top of the stairs, for instance. Okay. Any questions? All right. Are you guys following along? Just wanted to see. Okay, cool. And let me know if I'm going too fast or too slow, because some of this might be fairly obvious for some of you anyway, if you've done this before. So one thing I want to also talk about for the moment is cameras and kind of setting up cameras at various positions, right? So I have a couple of cameras set up here. And the reason I want to do that is, one, I might want to take renderings from my project later on, right? If you're doing this for a studio project, you can set a series of cameras so you can then understand what angle or what view you're going to eventually take, and just make sure that you're composing your scene accordingly to kind of fill the viewport of the camera in the way that you want. But what's also beneficial is, you know, I like to use my cameras to then how do I get to my screen? There we go. To like take screenshots. You could also just take screenshots, but to take screenshots and start figuring out what it is that I want to eventually do, right? And so I just like took some screenshots with either the cameras I placed or just from my views to just kind of like give myself a to-do list of what I want the final scene to look like. And I might not even do this because I might not even have the character walk this far. But at the very least, having like the starting position so that the character can kind of, you can kind of envision what your player is looking at could be helpful, right? And so, you know, here's that weird war vehicle that I added. You know, the position of it is a little different than in my sketch, but it's there. You know, I have my guard characters. I have some guard characters walking alongside it. I've kind of updated my totem, the call button, and I was maybe thinking about putting a button there or putting another kiosk here, and then have the player interact with some kind of a user interface by pushing this button, and something would appear, right? And so sketches are really helpful to just kind of define and limit, really more importantly, what you want to do in your scene. And so based on that sketch, I added a scale figure here, grabbed like a bollard from Quixel, and this is another sort of concrete asset I found from Quixel. And then I have a cube here that's essentially just going to be my placeholder for my little blue call box button. But eventually what I'll do is model it to look something more like this, right? And so, you know, a big red button, hopefully it'll be intuitive enough for the character to then, you know, move their hand controller and push it. And upon pushing the button, I want this UI screen to appear, right? And so if we go back into our scene, I have 4 planes, which I'm going to use as my UI screen. I have a generic cube that I set up to be my sort of call box that's going to make this thing appear or disappear, right? This screen was created using 3ds Max. I'll just open that and show you. And I think they're just basic planes. And you could also make your planes the way we did last week for the video screens. But I just set it up this way because the corners of these kind of align to a sphere, and that kind of felt a little, that it worked a little bit better. And so, you know, this is essentially standing in for my player. And so when my player presses the button, you know, they'll be faced or presented with a series of these screens, right? And so right now, this is just a static mesh actor, right? As I said, I made this from 3D Studio Max, right? So I started with a sphere. I kind of shrunk the faces of the sphere, and then I added some planes and kind of stretched them from corner, just corner to corner. And so the overall shape of my UI conforms with the sphere. So it just feels a little bit more intentional and organized. If you're more comfortable doing things like this in Rhino, we can just open up a new project. And what I would do is, instead of using a NURB sphere, if you go into your mesh tools, you can go into mesh primitives and you can use a sphere. And I think 10 faces you can control the number of faces. And what that does is, if we go into shaded, it gives me like a panelized sphere, which is going to be far more useful for my screen. So I could take 3 of these guys and maybe 3 of these guys and use those as my screen or screens. And if I go into mesh edit tools, I can just delete some of these faces, right? So if I highlight these faces, right, I can start deleting the ones I don't need. Right, now if I hit enter, right, I end up with 6. I can shrink these individually and start to use this as like an array, which I can use instead of my 4 screens here, right? That's basically how I'm doing this, right? Once you're happy with the way your screens look, I'm just doing an export selected and exporting these out as an FBX. Okay, if you want to import these screens, they're located here as well, I think. These UI screen.fbx will get you this model. Oh, the other thing I did is, because I want different things to appear on each of these faces, in 3ds Max, if I hit M to access my materials, I just created 4 blank materials and assigned them to each of these faces prior to joining them, right? You could do the same thing in Rhino. I can just create an entirely new surface from each of these corners, right? In this case, these will be NURB surfaces, but I can always just export them and it'll be triangulated, right? But the reason I also want to create these faces is because I want each surface or each panel to take on an entire mesh, or the mesh to sort of take up the entire texture. And what I mean by that is, if we go back into our sample assets, I kind of found some images online as placeholders for user interface elements. And I drag them into my Unreal project. Save that. Under prompts? No. Let me just do a search here. So it's called LED dash screen. Right. This is where keeping things organized is helpful. So LED screens. This is located in Geometry Meshes UI screen. Right. So maybe I'm a little too organized to the point where I can't find things, right? So Geometry Meshes UI screens. So let's get rid of my search here. Oops. So in my UI screens folder, I imported that FBX file. So now it's a static mesh. And we can see that the 4 material slots I brought in came in as separate materials, right? So now what I can do is drag each of these textures onto any of these surfaces, and they'll start to kind of stretch and fill the extents of that particular mesh, right? I could also do that by going in here, right? And bringing in my texture. And instead of the blue color, I just connect my texture file, right? So it's essentially the same thing. These two are ultimately the same, right? But if you have something a little bit more complex, you can just go in and apply that texture. And obviously you can use your own custom textures that you create in Photoshop. Right? So, you know, this is just beginning to set up what I want the experience of this to be, right? And so I have my panels, which will be my UI screens. I might make this translucent. I might cut out all of the black elements. But ultimately, this will then be a blueprint, right? Right now, it's a static mesh actor. So I'm going to turn this into a blueprint that will turn on and off based on my pushing a button, right? So let's try to do that in the time we have remaining, right? And what this will help you understand is how to use triggers and blueprints to turn things on and off with the user's with the user input, right? So we can have the user use their controller hand and like touch a button and have this thing appear. And when they take their hand away, maybe it disappears, right? But if you can do that with any kind of input. We can do that with keyboard inputs. And for our purposes here, I'll just select a key to turn this thing on and off. But we can use collisions to turn these things on and off, which will be probably more useful for VR. And so let's set that up, right? So I'm going to right click on this. And how do I do this? I think I can just, yeah. So with my UI screen selected, I can convert that into a blueprint by clicking on this button, and I can name it whatever I want to. You know what? I think what I will suggest instead is let's just create our own blueprint the old-fashioned way, right? So let's right-click in our content. So I'm going to stay in my UI screens folder, and I'm going to right-click and click on Blueprint Class, and we're going to create a Blueprint Actor, right? I'm going to call this BP underscore UI screens. And then I'm going to double click on that. And so remember, a blueprint is kind of like a world within a world. So it has stuff that can exist within it. And then the event graph or the construction script is where we'll add all of the kind of cause and effect elements that the blueprint is intended to perform, because we're creating a blueprint for the purposes of it doing something. And so we know we want at least a static mesh or component within our blueprint. That's going to be our UI screens. Right? I can click on this, or I can find my FBX and drag it in here, right? And so now we have our UI screens. I'm gonna dock this blueprint tab over here and then just switch back to this. If I highlight the static mesh UI screen I have here, you'll see that I changed the scale a little bit. And so I'm just gonna note that, and I might wanna adjust the scale of my static mesh actor here to match. But let's see if 1 and 1.16 are not that far off, so let's just leave that. So at this point, I have my UI screen, but what I can do is just add my blueprint in here as well. I can lift this up and rotate it and kind of position it, right? And so I'm just gonna put this, and I'm just gonna move this off to the side, right? So for all intents and purposes, these are identical, right? Because all I have in my blueprint right now is the static mesh actor. In this case, this one's a little bit bigger than the other one, but that's all we have currently. So it's gonna be more or less the same. But what we wanna do is give it some functionality, right? We want this to kind of appear or disappear depending on what the character is going to do. And so is this the best way of doing that? Let's try a couple of different ways, right? So one is we can control the appearance of something through the material, or we can control the appearance of something through blueprints by making it visible or invisible. And essentially what we'd be doing is, with our static mesh selected, we would be toggling its visibility, right? But let's do something a little bit different, right? Because we're using a material for each of these elements, and all it is a material, I think what I might want to do is change the appearance of the screen, or make the appearance or disappearance of the screen be a function of its transparency, as opposed to turning on or off the static mesh. And so let's start with this screen. I'm going to double click on this to access the material. And so what I'm essentially going to do is let's insert a scalar parameter and call this and connect this to the opacity, right? But we also need to make this material not an opaque material, but a translucent material, right? So notice that it disappeared, and it's because our transparency is currently set to 0. But if I set this to 1, it should appear, right? So if I kind of slide this away, I can control the appearance of my screen using its transparency, right? So I want to control this value using my blueprint to make this screen not appear. And the way we can control materials in this way is to look in the materials and textures and use something called a material parameters collection, right? And a material parameters collection is the ability for us to, in blueprints, control parameters like this within materials, right? So it's kind of named fairly aptly. So let's right click here and rename this, call this MPC for material parameter collection. And let's call this UI trans for UI transparency, right? So I'm going to double click on this, and we have the option of creating scalar parameters or vector parameters. Scalar parameters are going to be like this, a single number from 0 to 1. A vector parameter is parameter, right? A vector parameter is a parameter that is comprised of multiple numbers. It's essentially RGB and an alpha channel, right? So this is just a container that has 4 numbers as opposed to a container that has 1 number, right? So whenever you see scalar versus vector, that's what that means, right? In this case, we just want to control a single number that represents our transparency. So I'm going to go ahead and create one scalar parameter, right? Let's call this screen transparency, right? And we'll set a default value of 1 because actually, let's just set a default value because we want it to not appear in the beginning, right? So I'm going to hit save. And in my material, sorry, getting this weird glitch. Let's stop here for a moment and restart. Does anyone have any questions so far? While I restart my Unreal Engine. I know I'm kind of going fast, but it's recorded, so hopefully you'll be able to follow along. But material parameter collections are just ways of controlling the certain elements of materials using blueprints, right? In this case, we're just using it to adjust the transparency to go from 0, which is totally transparent, and to 1, which is fully opaque. But we probably won't even go to 1 because we do want to make it look like a kind of like a floating computer screen, right? Let's open the project back up. So Sita, your Monday, Tuesday, and I'm just looking at the chat. And Thursday, Friday for the, like everybody else is Thursday, Friday. Okay.
I think everyone else here is third year.
Everyone else is a third year or last year of. And then who has the thesis? I know of a couple of students, but anyone else have thesis review on the same day that you haven't already contacted me for MR2s? Okay. Sorry, I'm just stalling because my Unreal is starting back up. All right, here we go. Share my screen again. When you restart, you'll see that the sequencer is turned off. all you need to do is go back if you need to access it again. Highlight the level sequence actor and click on this button, open level sequence, and then you'll be able to edit your sequence again, just so you know. So, here we have our material. And so instead of this scalar parameter, I actually then want to use my one of my collection parameters, right? And so I right-clicked here and started typing collection to get my collection parameters. And what I will do here is use that MPC asset that I created, which is the MPC underscore UI transparency, right? And I can access whichever parameter I created within that, which is screen transparency, right? So again, that is in here, right? I created or added a scalar parameter, which I call screen transparency, right? But maybe I want a different transparency for each one. So I can create another scalar parameter in this collection and change its name. And I'll just call this screen to trans, right? So then I could use an entirely different variable for a different screen, right? And so I might set up 4 of these because I have 4 screens, and maybe I don't want them to appear, exactly at the same time, right? These are like kind of subtle details, but if you want to just use one, that's totally fine too, right? But going back into our material, what I want to do is I want to connect this instead, right? Because I want to control this value using blueprints, right? And so now in my blueprint, I guess you can kind of see it still here. Am I using the wrong material? Sorry, let me just check one thing real quick. BP, let's open up that blueprint again. I just want to make sure I have the right material associated. So pull this out. I actually want to use, right, is this the right material? One default, yes, it is. Sorry. Okay. So I don't know. I thought this wouldn't be totally visible at all, but it seems to be showing for some reason. Let's go back into our material transparency. Let's just set this to 1 and hit save. And now it should be totally opaque. We set this 0 and hit save. It's totally transparent. Yes. And why can I see? How can I see it here? Okay, we'll figure that out. But this is kind of what I want it to look like anyway. So we'll figure that out. I don't know why it's doing that. Let's go into our blueprint. And in our construction script, actually in our event graph, let's add some functionality to this blueprint, right? I want to use a button here to control what's going on here. And so in my blueprint, I'm going to add, with my default scene root highlighted, I'm going to click on add component. And I want to add, there are no triggers in blueprints, right? So I actually just want to add a collider. So I'm going to add a box collision. Go into my viewport. And I could sort of change the size of this thing But let's just leave that there. And so now if we go into our scene, we can see our collider here, right? What we're going to want to do is make this roughly the size of the button that we want, right? So I have a cube. I actually am going to set up another placeholder object here for our button, right? So I want to align my cylinder with my cube. So I'm just going to right click on the location, copy it, and paste it. I also want to copy the rotation. That. I don't know why the location didn't. So copy, paste, there we go. And then I'm just going to scale this down. So with my lock box or my lock here locked, I can just uniformly scale this down. I'm going to turn on my snaps here so I can snap in increments of 90. And then I'm going to hit W to access, right? So I just want to create something of a button. And I'm going to hit R to scale. So I want to scale this a little flatter, to be a little flatter. And I'm going to maybe hit R again. Oops. And scale this to be a little bit smaller, right? So eventually I want my trigger to maybe coincide dimensionally with this, right? Let's go back into our blueprint and take our box collider. And again, with this, I'm just going to shrink our box collider down. And see where that is. So this is my default scene route. So I need to kind of drop it down, right? If I sort of were smarter about this, I would actually include my my box and my cube into our blueprint. But what time is it? For time's sake, I'm just gonna move my trigger to kind of be roughly over here, right? But all that to say, the trigger can basically be anywhere, right? So that's further out, right? Let's call that close enough, right? Now we can do better. Right. So when my hand controller crosses into this box, what I want to do is change my material parameter collection to go from, say, 0 to 1, right? And so in our blueprint, in our event graph, what I can do is grab an event. Actually, if I scroll down here, on component begin overlap, right? So when something with a collider overlaps this box, I can also do something when the sort of collision ends, right? So I can have the screen turn on when something is overlapping that collision box that I created. And then I could have the screen turn off when that collision ends, right? And so I can't remember the exact name of the command, but what I'm looking for here is something that's going to set my material parameter. Maybe I should type collection. I'm going to turn this off. set collection. MPC. Sorry, guys, I don't remember what. There we go. No. Oh, it's just set scalar, sorry. Set scalar parameter value, and then we designate the collection, and we designate which one we want, right? So on begin overlap, right? So when the player's hand collides with that collision box that we set up, this will trigger everything after it to start, right? And so what we can do is create a variable, and we want it to be a float, and we'll set this to be transparency. Right? And we could make it visible if we want to. Doesn't really. And we can, get it and connect it. Actually, so let's do two variables. Let's call this call it transparent. So we're going to create two variables, right? My opaque variable is going to be set. So let's hit compile. So now I can set a default value, and let's set it to 0.8 or something along those lines. And my transparent is going to be 0, right? So when I overlap, I want to make that value be 1 or close to 1 so that it's more opaque. And then we're going to do the same function, except we're going to change that parameter value using this other number or 0 when the overlap ends, right? So in order for me to be able to see the UI, something has to be intersecting with that collision box. Okay, so let's go ahead and save. I'm going to delete this character, and this character has a collider, so I'm just going to walk this character over and collide with this, and let's see if we got this thing to work properly. So now I hit play. We can see, I just got run over by. I'm going to move my character so we're closer, right? And so now if we let's move our collider out a little bit. So I'll make sure intersect with it. And I'm just going to make it bigger for the purposes here. I'm just going to use a character to collide with it. let's move this down so I have to walk so far. It's not working. So what did I do wrong? So let's go back into our blueprint. Collision. Generate overlap events. So let's try another thing in addition to the collider, just to see if it's the collision or the actual set scalar parameter value isn't working. So I'm going to look for a key forward event. So I'm going to use the number 1. And so when the number 1 key is pressed, I want it to do the same thing. And when I release it, I want it to and I actually need to enable input. Get player controller. Okay. So this is a bit of code that allows me to then enter stuff on my keyboard. So on begin play, I'm enabling input, and I'm gonna then use a keyboard input to see if I can get this to work. So let's play this. And so if I hold down 1, it doesn't seem to be doing anything either. Try something else. Well, at least it's disappeared now. So let's see if this works. Now if I hit 1, there we go. And so if I move the character forward, it will appear or disappear. So in this case, what I did was I just changed the shading model from lit to unlit. And I don't know why that seemed to have an effect, or had the effect that it did. Although now it's working the way I expected it to. Okay. But with base color, oh, now it's working. Okay, so there was like a weird, strange glitch, it seems, right? So all I did was change it and change it back. So it's still default lit, and it's still my screen image is on the base color. And I'm using my material parameter, the scalar variable that I created to set my transparency. And so now I can hit play and either walk into my collision to make the appearance or to turn on the monitors, or I can use my keyboard event in which to do that. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay, so the other thing we can do is, instead of making it just turn on and off, what we can actually do is give it a smoother transition. What's nice about material parameters is we can always use a timeline. See if we can get this to work properly. We can add a timeline. Whoops. I'm going to name it Spoon. Let's hit compile. Where do I change my? Double click. Okay, double click to the, oh, there you go. Thought I was going crazy, right? So what I did was right click and type timeline to add a timeline. And what I can do is, by double clicking on the timeline, I can start to add variables and keyframe these variables. So I can add a float track and start from, say, 0. How do I do this now? Rename this to be I want to add a key, and then somewhere ahead, say a second later, add another key, except I want this to then be something close to 1. And I want my length of my timeline to just be 1 second. So what this is going to do is it's going to, instead of jump from 0 to 1, it's going to make something of a smoother transition to this value. And I think I said I want it to be 0.8. So let's give that a try. And so in my event graph, instead of using this value, I'm going to, on pressed, I want to play this timeline, which is essentially just holding a number, except it's kind of feeding out a value over time, right? And that value is going to be what I designated here as the screen transparency. And I want to then update my scalar parameter value. Okay, so now what this should do is when I hit play and I hit 1, it kind of appears slowly. Does that make sense? Or does that sort of register? So if I move my character forward, it only did it the first time. Play from start. Play from start. And so hit compile. If I hit play, so if I approach, it appears slowly, right? Let's make it a little bit more visible. I'm going to double click on this and let's make it appear over 5 seconds, which is not what I really want, but just to make it a little bit more obvious. Now when I hit play, you can see how it slowly appears, right? But it's not disappearing. When I leave, what I can do there is, instead of using these variables, what I can do is reverse the value when I leave the collider. You know, same from there, right? So reverse from end or play from start. And I only really just need one of these now. I don't really need this one anymore, right? So I'm setting the scalar parameter value. When I begin overlap, using this timeline, which will go from 0 to like 0.8 over 5 seconds, or when I leave, I'll play this timeline backwards from 0.8 back to 0. So let's go ahead and hit save there. And I hit play. So now it appears slowly. When I go away, it's not doing that. It's revert. Oh, it is doing it. It's just taking a long time. So it appears, and when I leave, it slowly should disappear. It's taking a lot longer than it seems to appear, but it is working. Okay. So this is another way of controlling this variable. And so instead of just setting two float variables with my transparent and opaque values, I can use a timeline to make things transition slowly. Okay. The other thing that might be helpful is within our material is, I might want to start adding some material masks. And so, I mean, this is really more of a Photoshop thing, right? So in Photoshop, if I go into my what did I save? I'm just going to download it from the box again. I forgot where I saved it. So let this be a lesson to keep track of where you save these things. I'm going to take this image and download it, and take this image and download it. And bring these into Photoshop. So this is my UI. This is the one we're using. So I'm just gonna select all of my black values. Right. So right click, layer from background. I'm gonna select the color range. I'm gonna find sense. And I'm just gonna delete that. And then I'm going to make everything black here. I'm going to save this as a JPEG. Right, and what this is going to do is everything that's transparent is going to be white, and everything that's black will be black. Let's go ahead and save that. And so I have an image, a black and white image that I want to use as a mask. So going back into Unreal, in the folder that I'm sort of holding all of these textures, I'm going to drag this one in. Right, so I have my UI and UI copy, and I'm just going to use this as a mask. And so let's drag this in. So I want to use this in addition to my scalar parameter for my transparency. And I think I can just do a multiply. Multiply is the same as in Photoshop, right? Everything kind of like adds together, or it's actually multiplies together. And so the images continues to get darker. So it treats each layer with equal strength, if that makes sense. But it's just like a multiplication node. So I'm multiplying this value by this and setting the opacity. So everything in white should always be transparent. And so we're not going to get a black screen anymore, hopefully. What we'll get is a masked, right? It's kind of working. Is it working? Maybe I need to invert. If you ever need to invert something. So make whatever is black, white, and whatever is white, black. That's a 1 minus node. And let's see if that solves it. We can just kind of check with this. I'm going to set this to 1. Yeah, right. So I want it when it's fully opaque to look something like this. So let's go back to this, hit apply, and hit play. And so now when I trigger, right, I'm just seeing the sort of additive color elements, right? I'm not seeing the black screen anymore. So now it kind of feels like digital information is kind of floating in the air, right? And so doing that is a bit of a material function, right? So it's a combination of the transparency that I'm using with a material parameter collection, as well as a mask that I created based on the original material or the original sample, right? So if I'm making my own user interface, right, I can essentially use use the same image to mask or to create a mask so that only the kind of glowing parts are visible in the end, right? That makes sense. So I might very well have created, instead of having starting from a glowing image, maybe I just start with black and white vector information, right? So now if I hit apply, let's just see what that looks like. So I'm just bypassing my screen here, right? So everything is appearing white. And so I actually want to do this instead. Right? So if, like, I don't have to, in other words, add all of the lit kind of elements. I could do that in Unreal by just sort of taking the appearance of this and instead of even using any of this stuff, I can just kind of take an array. I'm not explaining this very well. Let's just disconnect this. I'm going to select a color. So let's do a vector parameter, and I'm gonna say it's kind of a bluish glowing color, right? I can make it actually glow in Unreal by changing the material parameter from default lit to unlit and use this as an emission, right? So I'm going to double click on this again. Let's make it sort of like this color blue. Except make this 100, 100, and 100. And increase this to 50. Make this 50. Something like that. I'm just, I guess, this is too bright. Let's just make it 100. Okay. So what I'm doing here is I'm just using a color, right? And setting its value. Anything over 1 is emissive. It's actually emitting light. And I'm using my mask to sort of define everything that's happening there. So now if I hit apply, let's set this and hit apply. If I hit play, if I hit 1, I'm using the material to, or the emissive channel to generate light. And I'm using the mask to then define the information that's coming through, right? This is actually going to be helpful for those of you who are making like neon signs, for instance, right? You can just sort of establish your emissive color and value so that it glows, and then use a mask to kind of represent the text on the neon sign. Okay, and I'll go through that. I'll make a neon sign of sorts, but this is essentially what it's going to look like, right? You have a black and white image as a mask, and you just have an emissive color, and it's gonna emit light as long as the value is above 1, right? And then you could use that in combination with bloom. So I can show you what that will look like here. So I'm just gonna not use my parameter collection anymore. So I just want to keep this on, right? And so if I go into my post-process volume, right? So my post-process volume, right? The way things start to like have that glowing effect is just a function of bloom, right? So if you need the neon signs to glow a bit more, you can kind of ramp up the bloom a little bit. But bloom is going to work with all sorts of light. So you can kind of see that the scene became a little bit hazier, right? But it's essentially it's kind of replicating atmospheric haze, but it like works with emissive lights to make them look a little bit more kind of like glowy, for lack of a better term, right? And you can see if I turn the bloom off, it's still emitting light, but that glowing edge is kind of like, my mask isn't so great here. So we're seeing like a lot of like weird pixelation. But you can kind of mask that if you adjust the bloom in your post-process volume. Okay, we're actually out of time. I'll continue to kind of play with materials and show you how to kind of work with the different material slots and material channels. You know, we looked at the default lit and unlit, right? Default lit is going to include shadow information on the surface. Unlit does not have any shadow information and only uses the emissive channel. And so, you know, these are two very common kind of ways of making your materials change appearance. Unlit materials are cheaper because they aren't calculating shadow information. So something to bear in mind. So if you are doing something like neon signs and stuff, and all it is emitting light, using an unlit material would be very helpful. And we covered material parameters collections, which will allow you to change properties of a material, right? You can switch from one material to another, right? So I can create a lerp between two different textures and use the material parameter collection to switch between them. So if I want a material to change from red to blue or from brick to stone, I can do it that way too. And I can show you in the tutorials how you might do that. But material parameters collections are nice in the sense that you can control a variable for a material using blueprints. Okay, now I'm babbling. So well, we're at time. So, you know, I'll continue to add some more tutorials between now and the final. But if you guys have any questions about what we covered today, or if there are any other things you want to more specifically go through, please send me an email and I'll try to make sure to include those. Kevin, I know you requested the procedural generation. In the assets folder, I actually had some free market, like supermarket assets. And so there's a project there that you can grab a bunch of assets from. Also included are, in this anyway, you know, I couldn't find a cat. I know, being you wanted to put a cat in your scene. I did find a fox with animations, but I have some other farm animals for free if you guys wanted to use them. But look in the Epic Games Marketplace. I mean, that's where I found, like, you know, these assets, Sketchfab for a variety of assets. But in the Epic Games Marketplace, and I'll end here. Let's open the Epic Games launcher. Let me share my screen again. If you go into the marketplace, it's taking, oh, here we go. If you go on the marketplace, if you click on free or hover over free, there's permanently free stuff, which has a bunch of stuff, but there's free for the month. And so every month they have paid for assets that Epic, I think, sponsors and makes them available free to everyone. And, you know, I check periodically because, you know, you might find some nice furniture, some nice plants or certain rendering elements like weather, things like that. But if you go into the permanently free collection, there is a bunch of stuff that you can download, ArcViz scenes, these are particle systems. I would avoid using too many particles in VR, but you can do some particles if you wanted to. But there are a bunch of free assets. All of those vehicles that I have in my scene were all like part of the permanently free collection. And so, you know, I try to avoid paying for these things because a lot of stuff is available between here and on Sketchfab. And like I said, if you have any characters, you can import custom characters into Mixamo and apply those animations. All of those animations can be applied to basically any character that's like in T pose, right, with their arms out, or A pose with their arms kind of down 45 degrees, right? So if you find a character model that's not rigged, meaning it's not a skeletal mesh, you can convert that into a skeletal mesh in Mixamo. So if you have a character, in fact, well, we're out of time, so I'm not gonna go over it, but maybe I'll show you that process in a tutorial. Where did I save? I can show you real quick. And you guys are, whoever needs to leave can leave if you have another class to go to. But I will show you quickly. You know, I like basically scan myself standing on an A pose, and I could bring my character into Mixamo and do animations that way, right? And so, like, you know, go to town, right? So this is using Polycam on an iPhone 13. The school, don't do this for this class, please, just because it's going to take a lot of time and I'd rather you work on your scenes. But if you have an ArcViz scene and you want to put yourself or your friends in it, you could totally do that. You can create your own custom assets that way. But all this to say, anyone that's standing like this, any model that's standing like this, you can apply animations to. Okay, and so you could go on Turbo Squid and look for T-pose or A-pose characters and download free stuff and then bring it into Mixamo and add the animations and then make them walk and do stuff in Unreal Engine. All right. Any questions for those of you remaining or any special requests? You can let me know now or email me. Kyle, I hope this was helpful for you. Is Bo here also doing screens and UI in their scenes? I know Quincy, I think you're doing neon lights and things like that. Hopefully, you know, for those of, and Sita, I don't know if your marketplace has signs and neon signs and things like that. So hopefully this is helpful. Hopefully it's helpful to see how triggers work. You just need a collider. And if something overlaps that sort of invisible box, you can have a whole chain reaction of events start. And so I was trying to like tailor this to be as relevant to as many of you as possible. And so hopefully that's working. And then I'll continue to record tutorials. But if you guys want another work session like this, you know, I suppose it would be best to schedule it for next Thursday or Friday, or if not Saturday, so that, you know, it's after the final reviews and you guys are kind of, you know, knee deep in the rest of your classes. I'm happy to do that as well. So we can address, we can go through tutorials, but also address any specific needs you guys might have. All right. Does that sound interesting to you guys? Useful? Yeah. Okay. So plan for a Saturday or a Sunday, I think. I think Saturday makes the most sense. But I could also do Friday. Actually, no, Friday I can't do, but Saturday I could do. So let's just kind of, you know, hold that in your calendar. And it's optional. So if you're there, you're there. If not, and we could have some fun, like working on blueprints and making, you know, interesting materials and making characters dance and do all that sort of thing. Okay, so this is the last class. You know, it's been fun. I hope you guys had fun and learned how to use Unreal and sort of enjoyed the readings, and you know, hopefully parts of the readings are making their way in conceptually into your scenes. But you know, it's a lot, and I appreciate your patience and diligence and interest in this. But you know, it's kind of like in studio, no one asks you to, no one's sort of teaching you Rhino or AutoCAD or Revit at the same time as like teaching you how to like design stuff. And so this is kind of hard because you're learning the software in addition to trying to sort of conceptually contextualize it within a bunch of readings that you have to do in addition to it. So this is actually really challenging, but you know, I think a lot of the students here took my class, so have some familiarity and with Unreal Engine. I think a lot of students are starting to use game engines more in architecture school. So hopefully, you know, this is going to help out in the long run for both school and your careers as well. And the last thing I'll say is please, please, please complete your evaluations. Okay. I know you all have the intention of doing it, but it slips through the cracks. And so I'll send reminders, but please do the evaluations. It helps the school out a lot. It helps me out a lot. You know, go to town. If there's stuff you didn't like about what I did or did not cover, go to town. I mean, this is your opportunity. Don't be mean, but like go to town, you know, like be critical, like it's totally fine. And so, yeah, I think that feedback will be very much valued by Lake, myself, and the school. Okay, I took up too much of your time, so you guys are all free to go, but it's been a pleasure. And I look forward to the final developments of your projects.
Thank you, Jason. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. I hope you keep using Unreal Engine because it's actually really helpful for your studio projects. Maybe next semester.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks, Jason. Bye.
Okay, thank you.